What would you do if the only person who could save your dying child wore the uniform of the enemy who killed your son? In 1943 Colorado, hundreds of American families faced this impossible choice when a polio epidemic forced them to turn to Nazi POW doctors for salvation. June 17, 1943. St. Mary's Hospital, Pueblo, Colorado. The iron lung machines wheezed in mechanical rhythm, their bellows forcing air into the paralyzed lungs of 17 children. Outside the overwhelmed pediatric ward, Dr. Raymond Beater slumped against the corridor wall, his white coat stained with sweat and exhaustion. For 3 days straight he hadn't left the hospital. The polio epidemic of 1943 was ravaging Colorado, and he was one of only 4 doctors serving a population of 52,000. In his trembling hand, he held a telegram from the state health department, epidemic spreading. No additional medical personnel available. All reserves deployed to military. Situation critical. 23 miles away behind the barbed wire fences of Camp Carson, 2,000 German prisoners of war sat idle. Among them were 48 medical officers and 127 trained medics from the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe, men who had performed battlefield surgery under fire in Russia, treated typhus outbreaks in Ukraine, and saved lives in the scorching deserts of North Africa. They had the skills, they had the knowledge, but they were the enemy. What happened next would challenge everything Americans believed about their wartime adversaries and forge one of the most unlikely medical partnerships in history. The desperate telegram. Colonel William H. Shoemaker, commanding officer of Camp Carson, received Dr. Beater's desperate plea on June 18, 1943. At 8 a.m., the message was unprecedented. Request immediate assistance of German medical personnel for civilian emergency. Children dying. Please advise. The Geneva Convention was clear. POW medical personnel could treat fellow prisoners and, under extraordinary circumstances, could provide emergency aid to civilians. But this wasn't just emergency aid. This was asking Nazi officers to treat American children, to enter American homes, to work in American hospitals without armed guards. Among the German medical officers at Camp Carson was Oberstarst, Colonel Dr. Hermann Gmeiner. Aged 41, formerly chief surgeon of the 21st Panzer Division. Captured at Kasserine Pass in February 1943, Gmeiner had spent the last 4 months meticulously organizing the camp's hospital, turning a bare barracks into a functioning medical facility that served 2,000 prisoners with a level of efficiency that astounded American inspectors. When Colonel Shoemaker approached him with the request, Gmeiner's response was immediate. Herr Oberst, we are doctors first, soldiers second. When can we begin? But not all the Germans shared his view. Hauptmann Captain Friedrich Reuter, a fervent Nazi and senior camp spokesman, saw collaboration as treason. Any man who helps the Americans, he declared in the mess hall that evening, betrays the fatherland and will answer for it when we return home victorious. The battle lines were drawn, not between Americans and Germans, but between conscience and ideology, between the Hippocratic Oath and the Hitler Oath. The first crossing, June 20th, 1943. 5:47 a.m. The fog hung low over the San Carlos Valley as a convoy of 3 trucks departed Camp Carson. Inside, 12 German medical officers and 20 medics sat in silence, their POW uniforms marked with large white PW letters. Only 2 American guards accompanied them, a ratio that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. Dr. Gmeiner carried his medical bag, the same one he'd used in the Afrika Korps, still bearing the faded palm tree insignia of the division. Beside him sat Stabsarzt, Major Dr. Kurt Pfluger, 38, a pediatric specialist from Munich who hadn't treated a child in 16 months. His hands trembled, not from fear but from anticipation. The convoy's arrival at St. Mary's Hospital caused a commotion. Nurse Patricia Hawkins, 24, from Denver, later recalled in her diary, "I looked out the window and saw these German officers walking up our hospital steps. They wore enemy uniforms but carried medical bags. Some of the nurses cried. Mrs. Anderson, whose son was killed at Guadalcanal, had to leave the building, but we had 23 children who couldn't breathe on their own. Pride was a luxury we couldn't afford." The first patient Dr. Pfluger examined was 7-year-old Margaret O'Brien, whose respiratory muscles had been paralyzed for 6 days. Her mother, Dorothy O'Brien, initially refused to let a Nazi touch her daughter. But as Pfluger knelt beside the iron lung, speaking softly in accented English, explaining each step of his examination, something shifted. He had tears in his eyes, Dorothy later testified to the Colorado Historical Society. He showed me a photograph from his wallet, his own daughter about Margaret's age, still in Germany. He hadn't seen her in 2 years. That's when I realized he wasn't a Nazi examining my child. He was a father, helping another parent's little girl. The miracle worker. Within 48 hours, the German medical team had reorganized the entire polio ward. Dr. Gemeiner introduced triage protocols developed on the Eastern Front, categorizing patients by severity and chance of recovery. A system American hospitals hadn't yet adopted. Stabsarzt Wilhelm Hoffmann, 35, a respiratory specialist from Berlin, modified the iron lung machines to operate more efficiently, increasing their capacity by 30% using techniques he'd developed for high-altitude Luftwaffe pilots. But it was Oberfeldarzt, Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Hans Klotz, who would become legendary in Pueblo. A neurologist from Vienna, Klotz had studied under Professor Otto Marburg before the war and had extensive experience with neurological trauma. On June 23rd, he examined 12-year-old Tommy Martinez, who had been paralyzed for 9 days and showed no signs of improvement. American doctors had given up hope. The boy's father, Roberto Martinez, a railroad worker, had already been told to prepare for the worst. But Klotz detected something others had missed, a slight reflex in the boy's left toe when pressure was applied to a specific nerve point. "This boy will walk again," Klotz announced to the skeptical American medical staff. But we must act immediately. For the next 72 hours, Klotz barely left Tommy's bedside, using a treatment protocol he'd developed, treating spinal injuries from the Russian front. A combination of targeted electrical stimulation, specialized massage techniques, and controlled movement therapy. He worked with an intensity that amazed the American nurses. Nurse Hawkins wrote, "Dr. Klotz worked like a man possessed. When we brought him food, he'd forget to eat it. When we told him to rest, he'd say just 5 more minutes, which turned into 5 more hours. On the second night, I found him asleep standing up, still holding Tommy's chart. On June 26th at 3:17 p.m., Tommy Martinez moved his right leg voluntarily. By July 4th, Independence Day, he took his first steps, supported by parallel bars that the German POWs had constructed in their camp workshop and delivered as a gift. The Underground Railroad of Medicine. Word of the miracle doctors spread rapidly through Colorado. By July 1943, German POW medical teams from Camp Carson were treating civilians in 7 counties. They traveled in unmarked vehicles to avoid publicity and potential backlash. The program, officially designated Emergency Medical Assistance Program 7-43, remained classified until 1946. The statistics were staggering. Between June 1943 and May 1945, German POW doctors from camps across Colorado treated 741 American civilian. Patients performed 1937 surgical procedures, delivered 483 babies administered, 24,000 vaccinations reduced. Polio mortality in their treatment areas by 31%, but the numbers only tell part of the story. In the small farming community of Las Animas, Colorado, population 3,200, the only doctor had been drafted in 1942. When a diphtheria outbreak struck in August 1943, 5 German doctors from Camp Carson arrived within 6 hours of the first distress call. They established a field hospital in the local school gymnasium. Working around the clock for 8 days, Feldwebel, Sergeant Otto Müller, a medical technician from Hamburg, maintained a secret diary during this period, writing, "Today I saved an American farm boy, age 9, from choking to death on the membrane in his throat. His mother kissed my hands and cried. I thought of my own son in Hamburg, wondering if he still lives after the bombing. How strange this war is. I am a prisoner healing the children of my captors, while their bombers perhaps kill mine." The resistance within. Not all German POWs supported the medical assistance program. The camp was divided between anti-Nazi Germans, who embraced the opportunity to practice medicine again, and hardline Nazis who viewed collaboration as betrayal. This tension exploded on September 14, 1943. Dr. Johannes Steinberg, 33, a Jewish German doctor who had been conscripted into the Wehrmacht Medical Corps before his heritage was discovered, had just returned from treating children at a local orphanage. As he entered Barrack 7, 5 prisoners were waiting for him. They accused him of being a traitor to the Reich and a friend of the Jews. The beating lasted 4 minutes. By the time American guards intervened, Steinberg had suffered a fractured skull, 3 broken ribs, and a ruptured spleen. Dr. Gemeiner performed emergency surgery in the camp hospital, saving Steinberg's life. The incident triggered what historians now call the Camp Carson Revolt. Anti-Nazi prisoners, led by Gemeiner and including most of the medical personnel, demanded separation from Nazi loyalists. On September 20th, Colonel Shoemaker made an unprecedented decision. He segregated the camp, moving 341 identified Nazi loyalists to Camp Trinidad, while keeping the anti-Nazi Germans and medical personnel at Camp Carson. From his hospital bed, Dr. Steinberg dictated a letter to Colonel Shoemaker. "I joined the medical program not despite being attacked, but because of it. Every American child we heal proves that not all Germans have lost their humanity. This is my resistance against Hitler, not with guns but with healing hands." The love that couldn't be. Among the most poignant stories from this period was that of Stabsarzt Erich Richter, 29, from Dresden, and Mary Catherine Bennett, 26, a nurse from Colorado Springs. They met during the polio epidemic, when Richter was assigned to Glockner Tuberculosis Sanatorium to treat children with respiratory complications. Their relationship began professionally. Mary Catherine was tasked with translating medical instructions and ensuring Richter followed hospital protocols. But over long nights in the children's ward, professional respect evolved into something deeper. They would discuss medical procedures, share experiences from their training, and gradually, carefully, talk about their dreams for after the war. On December 24, 1943, Christmas Eve, Richter was treating a critically ill 5-year-old boy named William Garrett. The child needed a complex thoracic surgery that only Richter had the experience to perform. The operation lasted 6 hours. Mary Catherine served as his surgical nurse. She later wrote in a letter to her sister, "When little William opened his eyes on Christmas morning, breathing on his own, Eric cried." This man, who had seen horrors on the Eastern Front I cannot imagine, wept over one small American boy's survival. "In that moment I knew I loved him. God help me, I loved a German prisoner of war." Their relationship remained secret, communicated through medical notes with personal messages hidden in Latin medical terminology. Richter would write treatment plans that included phrases like "cor meum tibi dedi," "I've given my heart to you," among legitimate medical instructions, but their story would have no happy ending. In April 1945, as Germany's defeat became imminent, Richter was transferred to Camp Rupert, Idaho, in preparation for eventual repatriation. Their last meeting, witnessed by nurse Patricia Hawkins, took place in the hospital supply room. They had 4 minutes. Mary Catherine never married. She continued nursing until 1987, keeping a photograph of Richter in her desk drawer for 44 years. Richter was repatriated to Soviet-occupied Dresden in 1946. His fate remains unknown. The controversial surgeries. The most controversial aspect of the program occurred in February 1944. A train derailment near Fountain, Colorado, left 47 civilians injured, overwhelming local medical facilities. The most critical patient was Margaret Thompson, 31, pregnant with twins who had suffered massive internal injuries. The only surgeon within 100 miles with experience in such complex trauma surgery was Oberstarzt Friedrich Bauer, former chief surgeon of the 15th Panzer Division. The problem: Bauer was not just a POW but a member of the Nazi Party since 1933, with an Iron Cross First Class, allowing him to operate on an American woman, to literally hold American lives in his hands, sparked fierce debate. Sheriff Tom Morrison threatened to arrest anyone who brought that Nazi into the operating room. But Margaret Thompson's husband, Staff Sergeant James Thompson, home on leave from the Italian campaign, made the decision. "I don't give a damn about his politics," Thompson declared. "My wife and babies are dying. If Adolf Hitler himself could save them, I'd shake his hand." The surgery lasted 11 hours. Bauer performed what medical historians consider one of the most complex operations of the era, repairing a lacerated liver, removing a damaged spleen, and performing an emergency cesarean section. Both twins survived. Margaret Thompson recovered fully. 6 weeks later, she brought her twins to Camp Carson. The meeting between the Thompson family and Dr. Bauer was photographed by Life magazine, but never published, deemed too controversial for wartime America. In the photo, Bauer, in his POW uniform, gently holds one of the babies while Margaret Thompson smiles beside him. The image remained classified until 1968. The scientific exchange. Beyond emergency medicine, an unexpected scientific collaboration emerged. Dr. Hoffman, the respiratory specialist, had been researching treatment for pneumoconiosis, black lung disease, common among Ruhr Valley coal miners. Colorado's coal mining communities suffered the same affliction. In November 1943, Hoffman was permitted to study medical records from Colorado mining towns and developed a treatment protocol that reduced mortality by 18%. Similarly, Oberstarzt Walter Zimmermann, an expert in high-altitude medicine from his service with Wehrmacht mountain troops, shared techniques for treating altitude sickness with doctors from Denver's National Jewish Hospital. His protocols were later adapted by the U.S. Army Air Forces for bomber crews operating at high altitudes over Germany. A bitter irony not lost on Zimmermann. The exchange wasn't one-directional. American doctors introduced the Germans to new antibiotics, particularly streptomycin for tuberculosis treatment. Dr. Gemeiner meticulously documented these treatments, creating medical records that would prove invaluable when he returned to Germany's destroyed medical infrastructure after the war. Dr. Paul Harrison, Chief of Staff at Denver General Hospital, wrote in his 1944 report, "The German medical officers have demonstrated not only exceptional clinical skills, but an eagerness to exchange knowledge that transcends our current conflict. We are enemies by circumstance, colleagues by profession, and ultimately healers by calling." The Children's Christmas, December 1944, marked the program's most touching moment. The German medical staff at Camp Carson had treated over 2,000 American children by this point. For Christmas, they decided to organize something special. Using their meager POW wages, 80 cents per day, combined with donations from anti-Nazi German prisoners, they commissioned toys from the camp's workshop. Skilled craftsmen among the POWs, former carpenters, engineers and artisans, worked through the nights creating wooden trains, dolls, rocking horses and puzzles. Each toy was hand-painted with non-toxic paints mixed from vegetables and clay found around the camp. Dr. Pfluger, the pediatrician, personally inspected each toy for safety. On December 23rd, a convoy delivered 500 handmade toys to children's wards across Colorado. Each toy bore a small tag, "Made with Hope for Peace, German POWs." Camp Carson, 8-year-old Barbara Watson, recovering from polio at Memorial Hospital, received a wooden doll with movable joints and hand-sewn clothes. 50 years later, she still owned it, telling a Denver Post reporter in 1994. "That doll was made by men who were supposed to be our enemies. But enemies don't spend 100 hours carving and painting a toy for a sick little girl they've never met." That Christmas, the German prisoners taught me more about humanity than all my Sunday school lessons combined. The persecution. As news of German POWs treating American civilians inevitably leaked to the broader public, reactions were mixed and often violent. On March 3, 1945, Dr. Klotz was returning from an emergency call in Pueblo when his escort vehicle was forced off the road by 3 cars. 6 men, including 2 veterans home on medical discharge, dragged Klotz from the vehicle. "You Nazi bastard! How many Americans did you kill before you started pretending to save them?" One attacker shouted. The beating would have killed Klotz if not for the intervention of Roberto Martinez, Tommy's father, whose son Klotz had helped heal. Martinez, who had been following the medical convoy as an informal protector, fought off the attackers with a tire iron. "This man saved my boy," Martinez shouted at the fleeing attackers. "He gave me back my son. What have you done except spread hate?" The incident led to increased security for German medical teams, but also to something unexpected: the formation of the Families for Fairness Committee. comprised of American civilians whose loved ones had been treated by German doctors. By April 1945, the committee had 200 members who provided protection, home-cooked meals, and even legal support for the German medical personnel. The bitter end, May 8, 1945, VE Day. As Americans celebrated in the streets, the German medical personnel at Camp Carson gathered in their hospital barracks. The war in Europe was over. They had lost. Their homeland was destroyed, divided, occupied. Many didn't know if their families had survived. Dr. Krammer addressed his medical staff that evening. "We came here as prisoners. We remained here as doctors. Whatever judgment history passes on Germany, let it record that here in Colorado, German hands healed instead of harmed. That is our small redemption." But their work wasn't finished. The repatriation process would take months, even years. Spanish flu struck Colorado in September 1945, and once again German doctors answered the call. They treated American civilians until the very day of their departure. The last goodbye, January 15, 1946. The final contingent of German medical personnel prepared to leave Camp Carson for repatriation. The scene at the train station defied every wartime narrative. Hundreds of American families came to say goodbye. Children held handmade signs reading "Thank you" in German. Mothers brought baked goods for the journey. Veterans, some still in uniform, shook hands with their former enemies. Dr. Pfluger was saying goodbye to the Martinez family when Tommy ran up and hugged him around the legs. "Don't go, Dr. Fritz," the boy cried, using the nickname he'd given Pfluger. "Who will take care of us when we're sick?" Pfluger knelt down, his own eyes wet. "I have wonderful American doctors, Tommy. You don't need us anymore." "But they're not you," the boy replied. The scene was captured by photographer Joe Kavanaugh, but the image was buried in newspaper archives, too complicated for a nation trying to make sense of its recent enemies. As the train pulled away, Dr. Krammer watched from his window as America disappeared. In his pocket was a letter from Colonel Shoemaker with a single line: "You entered this country as enemies. You leave as healers. That is the highest honor any prisoner has ever earned." The aftermath and reunion. The German doctors returned to a homeland in ruins. Dr. Krammer found his hospital in Stuttgart destroyed, his home gone. But using techniques learned from American colleagues and antibiotics knowledge gained at Camp Carson, he helped establish one of the first modern hospitals in the American occupation zone. The U.S. Army, recognizing his work in Colorado, fast-tracked medical supplies to his facility. Dr. Klotz made it back to Vienna to find the university hospital where he'd trained partially destroyed. He spent 20 years rebuilding the neurology department, incorporating treatment methods he'd developed in Colorado. In 1967, he received an unexpected letter. Tommy Martinez. Now Dr. Thomas Martinez had become a neurologist, inspired by the man who'd saved his ability to walk. In 1970, a remarkable reunion took place. The city of Pueblo invited all surviving German medical personnel who had served in Colorado back for a ceremony. 12 made the journey, now elderly men. Dr. Pfluger, then 65, was met at the airport by 43 adults, all former child patients. Barbara Watson was there with her wooden doll. Tommy Martinez, now with children of his own, introduced them to Opa Fritz. Mary Catherine Bennett attended the reunion. Erich Richter did not. He had died in Soviet captivity in 1947, a fact she learned only in 1969 through Red Cross records. At the ceremony, she read from his last letter, written but never sent from Camp Rupert. "If this war has taught me anything, it's that healing transcends all boundaries, nation, ideology, even love itself. Every child we saved in Colorado was a small victory against the darkness that consumed our homeland." The keynote speaker was Dorothy O'Brien, Margaret's mother. Her words resonated through the silent auditorium. "These men came to us wearing the uniform of our enemy. They left wearing the invisible cloak of our gratitude. They were prisoners of war who became prisoners of conscience, choosing to heal when they could have harbored hate. In our darkest hour, they were our unlikely angels." The hidden records. For decades, the full extent of the German POW medical program remained classified or forgotten. It wasn't until 1995 that historian Dr. Arthur Smith of California State University discovered a cache of documents in the National Archives labeled only medical operations restricted. These papers revealed that German POW medical personnel had been active in 26 states, treating over 40,000 American civilians between 1943 and 1946. The most stunning revelation, a secret recommendation from Surgeon General Norman T. Kirk in 1945 suggesting that selected German medical personnel be offered immediate citizenship and positions in underserved American communities. The proposal was rejected by President Truman, who feared public backlash. "The nation," Truman wrote in a classified memo, "is not ready to embrace yesterday's enemies as tomorrow's neighbors, regardless of their contributions." But in communities across Colorado, that embrace had already happened. In 1985, Las Animas renamed its medical center the Gemeiner Harrison Clinic, honoring both the German POW doctor and the American physician who had advocated for the program. The dedication plaque reads, "In memory of a time when enemies became healers, and healing became brotherhood." The philosophical question. The story of German POW doctors in America raises profound questions that resonate today. Can good deeds absolve participation in an evil regime? Does individual compassion matter when one serves a genocidal government? How do we reconcile the Wehrmacht doctor who saved American children with the uniform he wore, representing a nation conducting the Holocaust? Dr. Gemeiner himself grappled with this in a 1972 interview, 3 years before his death. "I was a German officer. I served my country, which committed unforgivable crimes. I will not claim innocence. But in Colorado, I had a chance to remember what I was before the war. A healer. Those American children didn't heal my nation's guilt, but they helped heal my soul." The American families who benefited from German medical care had their own complex feelings. Sarah Morrison, whose premature twins were saved by Dr. Hoffman in 1944, reflected in 1990, "My brother died fighting Germans in Italy. A German doctor saved my babies in Colorado. I've spent 45 years trying to make sense of that. I can't. All I know is that my children lived because a prisoner of war cared more about his medical oath than his military one." The modern legacy. Today, the story of German POW doctors in America remains largely unknown, overshadowed by broader World War II narratives, but its legacy persists in unexpected ways. The triage protocols Dr. Gemeiner introduced are now standard in American emergency medicine. The high-altitude medicine research shared by Dr. Zimmerman contributed to NASA's early space program. The toy-making tradition started by Camp Carson POWs inspired the Toys for Tots program, founded by Marine Corps Reserve Major Bill Hendricks, who had witnessed the 1944 Christmas distribution as a young Colorado National Guardsman. In 2018, the Colorado Historical Society opened a small exhibit titled "Healers Behind Barbed Wire." The centerpiece is Dr. Klotz's medical bag, donated by the Martinez family, still containing the instruments he used to save Tommy. Beside it sits Barbara Watson's wooden doll on permanent loan. The guest book fills with comments from visitors surprised by this hidden history. One entry from an Iraq War veteran captures the enduring relevance. "I never knew this story. In Baghdad, an insurgent doctor saved my life after an IED. I struggled with that for years. This exhibit helps me understand healing is bigger than war." Conclusion: the paradox of compassion. The story of German POW doctors in Colorado represents one of World War II's most complex chapters, a narrative that defies simple categorization as triumph or tragedy, good versus evil. These were men who served a criminal regime, yet performed acts of profound humanity. They wore the uniform of the enemy, while wielding the tools of healing. They were prisoners who became saviors, enemies who became neighbors, and in some cases, strangers who became family. Perhaps Dr. Paul Harrison said it best in his final report to the War Department in 1946. "The German medical officers taught us that compassion can flourish even in captivity, that professional duty can transcend national hatred, and that sometimes our enemies can show us the best of humanity. They reminded us that even in war's darkest hours, healing remains possible, not just of bodies, but of the hatred that makes such wars possible." As we face modern conflicts and contemporary divisions, the story of Camp Carson's medical program offers a powerful reminder. Our common humanity manifests most powerfully when we least expect it, often from those we least expect. In the high plains of Colorado, behind barbed wire and beneath the weight of war, German doctors and American families wrote a chapter of World War II that Hollywood never filmed, and textbooks rarely mention. A story of redemption through medicine, of enemies transformed by empathy, and ultimately, their lives saved when healing mattered more than hatred. The last surviving German POW doctor from the Colorado program, Dr. Friedrich Engel, died in Munich in 2003 at age 95. His obituary in the Denver Post ran alongside those of American veterans. The headline read simply, Friedrich Engel, prisoner of war, healer of children, friend of Colorado. His granddaughter, accepting a posthumous humanitarian award from the Colorado Medical Society. Read from his final letter, "For 2 years I was a prisoner in America. For a lifetime afterward, I was free because of what America taught me. That healing knows no flags, no borders, no enemies, only humans who need help, and humans who can provide it." In the archives of Camp Carson, now Fort Carson, a simple ledger records the medical program's statistics: 7,841 patients treated, 37 operations performed, 483 babies delivered. But numbers cannot capture the true legacy. The American children who lived because enemy doctors cared, the German physicians who rediscovered their humanity in captivity, and the communities that learned to see beyond uniforms to the healers within. This is their story, complicated, controversial, and ultimately redemptive. It reminds us that even in humanity's darkest conflicts, light can emerge from the most unexpected sources. Behind the barbed wire of Camp Carson, enemies became healers, and in that transformation, both captors and captives discovered something profound. Our capacity for compassion is always stronger than our capacity for hate, if only we have the courage to embrace it.